Persuasive, Part 1.
Excellent. That also reminded me, Ms. Norholm, of what my mother always used to say, don't lock your knees, right? And sometimes when you're nervous, you lock your knees, and then there's that stereotypical fainting at your own wedding, right? Because you're standing there with your knees locked, blood flow's a problem to begin with, pretty soon the stress just cuts it off to your brain, and hopefully the guy catches you, right? But that idea of having the knees unlocked, I think, keeps that leaning forward. That's an interesting point. All right, we're going to have a very quick discussion, because we do have so much to do, about the science of persuasiveness. Now, some of these elements may help you in your presentation or in designing a persuasive speech, but I think they're very helpful to know for two reasons. Number one, throughout your whole life, you'll always have a need or opportunity to persuade people of things, whether you're trying to persuade your parents to buy you a car, or whether you're trying to persuade someone to give you a job, or whether you're in a job trying to persuade someone to buy your products, or give you a raise, or give you a bigger staff, or whatever you might want. There's a lot to do in life that requires good persuasion. And I came across an article in Scientific American's Mind magazine about 4 years ago, and I found it to be very, very helpful. And I cannot give you the whole copy of this article because it is copyright. But I can tell you that it's pretty easy to find if you do a web search for The Science of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini from Scientific American Mind. You can get yourself a copy of this. But I wanted to go over these 6 elements of persuasion briefly. You can take notes if you're so inclined. The first element is reciprocity. What does that mean? Does anyone know reciprocity or reciprocation? That verb, to reciprocate. Does anyone know the definition of it? Yes, Mikhail?
To receive something?
To receive and to give back. It's the idea that things balance out. If you give me something, I kind of owe you something in a way, don't I? In the Japanese culture, it's fascinating because the actual word for thank you in Japanese is, you have honorably made my life more difficult. So you do something for me and I say, oh, now you've honorably made my life more difficult. Why? Because now I kind of owe you a favor in return. I owe you something. That may be the Oriental, the Japanese mentality. But what we do know is that when people give you something, you feel a little bit obligated to them. Have you ever experienced this? I don't know if you've seen it at your house, but I get a lot of junk mail from people who are doing fundraising, and they want money for starving children in Africa, or for this cause or that cause or this cause. And sometimes they'll actually put a dollar bill right in the envelope. Has anyone ever seen that? Or a quarter taped on, or they'll give you a stamp, and I really should send them something. I mean, after all, they gave me this whole dollar. After all, it would be, horrible to throw away their stamped envelope. So you feel just a little bit as though you need to do it. I find this works verbally as well. If I'm teaching a group of children, or even sometimes adults, and I can start out with a bit of a joke, something amusing or entertaining, then I kind of give them something that makes them chuckle or feel a little better, and then they tend to pay, quote, pay, or give back a little bit more attention. So this whole idea of what can you offer, charity, goodwill, free, sometimes builds an element of persuasiveness. The next one is consistency. Consistency is the idea of getting people to kind of promise or agree that they will do something. So if I said to you, now, you'll all be on time next week, right? And you kind of nod. If I said, okay, how many people promise to be on time next week? Raise your hand. I actually would probably get a higher percentage of people who are here on time. And if I made you fill out a little form saying, I promise to be on time, to do my very, very best, right? I get an even higher percentage because you've made some degree of commitment. Fundraising people do this on the phone, call you up. Would you like to donate to our cause? I don't know. Tell me about it. Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Well, can we send you a letter confirming this? Sure. Would you talk to our supervisor and be sure it's okay that we send you a letter to confirm? What's that whole process? Trying to build in consistency. That when that thing comes in the mail and they want your actual money, you're like, well, I told them I'd do it. I guess I have to. You see? So that element of consistency. The third one I find very interesting, but it is a natural phenomenon, which is social validation. That would be the third one. And this is the case where, well, everybody's doing it, so it must be a pretty good thing to do. Fascinating experiment defined in this article is they managed to get 60 people to stand on a corner in New York City and look up at the top of a building. What do you think happened as a result of that? Everyone who walked by stopped and joined the crowd and started looking up. Nobody necessarily said to anybody else, what are we actually looking for? But there was this element of social validation, which it's just human nature. The more people that are doing it, the more you would have a tendency to be okay about joining in. And so you get that whole, 89 people out of 100 who do this use our product. It kind of gives it that social validity or authority, if you will, which is another factor as well. The fourth element of persuasiveness is liking or likability. Have you ever noticed that it's easier to be with teachers who seem to like you? It's easier to take advice from adults when they give it to you with a smile? No, you haven't noticed this? You have noticed. It's easier to buy a car from someone who is very friendly, wouldn't you say? And that's why all of those advertisements for almost everything have good-looking, smiling people, because it gives the impression of likability. You tend to be able to like some anonymous, good-looking, smiling person better than you might look, say, a not-so-good-looking, crabby, frowning person. So when you get into speech and debate, if you ever get into competition, keep that one in mind, because that's very powerful. And you walk over to the judge and you say, hi, I'm Andrew Pudawa. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Already, she likes me, right? She can't not like me, because I'm trying so hard to be likable and personable and smiling at her. Whereas if you come over, hi, I'm Andrew, I'll be doing the speech. What's the impression?
You don't like it.
Scared, not so friendly, or especially, you've got raccoon eyes. People know you've been crying in the car on the way. So likability, very powerful. And lastly, not lastly, but number 5 it is, authority. And this does connect with our speech and debate here. People are generally willing to accept the advice or be persuaded by someone who has a bit more authority. When I was your age, they still had commercials on television for cigarettes, which became illegal at a certain point. But I remember very specifically a commercial that said, 4 out of 5 doctors who smoke Marlboro. To you, it just sounds absurd. But at the time, it's like, well, if a doctor would smoke, and he smokes Marlboro, that must be the brand to smoke. And so there's, just because they happen to be doctors. And of course, you get people have many degrees, he's got his PhD from Harvard. Whatever he says has got to be worth more than whatever anybody else would say because of that authority factor. A very interesting experiment on this, though, that's more applicable to you. A man did an experiment to see how many people he could get to follow him across the street against the red light, right? Which would be technically illegal jaywalking. So he's there's other people waiting, and he just starts going across the street, right? And he tracked how often and how many people would follow him. Well, he found that if he changed his clothes and put on a suit and a tie, right, and dressed like a professional, he could increase the number of people who would follow him across the street against a red light by 350%. Why? Because those are symbols of authority in a way. if not consciously, then subconsciously. This is one reason why when you're in competitive public speaking, it's good to go ahead and dress to the T's. Buy the better suit, get the nicer clothes, stand up there. It just lends a certain air of authority and credibility, which is particularly important when you're a person like me, who has no real education at all. Last one is scarcity. Scarcity is that idea of call now, only 4 remaining, right? And if you don't do it now, they're going to be gone and you're going to lose out, right? Last chance to have a writing seminar on the Central Coast. I'm moving out of the state. Ooh, we better sign up for that one. Last chance, right? And what's funny, of course, is it may not be the last chance. There may be any number of additional things available or chances, but call in the next half hour and you will get the special deal. Don't call in the next half hour. You're out of luck. You're going to pay more. You're going to suffer. So act now. So these 6 factors, I think they're worth studying. The other reason it's very good to understand the science of persuasiveness here is because then you can start to detect when people are trying to pull it off on you. And you go, oh, that's just an appeal to scarcity. Oh, that's just a use of authority. Ha! That's just trying to convince me that because everybody does it, it's a good thing. I can think on my own and not be so easily manipulated. So I'd encourage you to search out this article. It's very well written. I've shared it with students for years, and many have found it to be very helpful. The Science of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, and there's a little reference on your handout there. Last thing I would like to encourage you is try to have fun. When you get up in front of the group, there is that nervousness, there is that concern, there's maybe even that underlying fear that you'll stumble or blow it or forget something or that people won't like whatever you're going to say, or if you're in competition that you're going to forget something and it's going to affect your score, your placement. But in the years of doing this, I can tell you probably the single most important thing that I have noticed in myself and in other people. If you're having fun, the audience is much more likely to be having fun. Even if it's